Kiana, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. Thank you so much for
Great.
taking part in this interview today. I'm so happy to have you here. And for those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us what you do?
Oh yeah, I do a lot of things. I'm formally trained as a somatic sex educator and a sexological body worker. And so a lot of my work in the past decade has been hands-on anatomy, pleasure, embodiment work. And I'm also an intimacy and relationships coach, a doula. I've been a doula for over a decade and a half. And I'm the chief content officer at Foria, which is a sexual wellness brand that is designed for the female body.
So, when people ask you what you do, how do you answer? Because I guess that must be a layered question.
It's so layered. Yeah. I try to succinctly I try to succinctly bring it into, I tell stories about women and the female body across all parts of our lives. I help people access more pleasure through understanding their body, through really working with their body, and then help people connect to their, most the most important and primal and the essence of who they are through sexuality.
So, what inspired you to start this journey about sexuality? Was it something that you were always interested in?
I was definitely always interested in it. I was, the person in college putting getting speculums and helping my friends find their cervixes and all sorts of things like that. But um, it really, really picked up after I became a mom. Like the first time I gave birth, there was such a huge difference in the way that I felt about my body and the way the world related to me as a woman now that I had a child. And it really piqued my interest about like how our sexuality changes throughout life based on our relationships, what we're going through, and kind of started pulling in this idea that we're, ripening and maturing and changing, going through all sorts of different evolutions of ourself across the lifespan, particularly as women and particularly those in the female body, and that we really don't talk about the nuance of that as much. And so that's what like piqued my interest. I was like, wow, this changes again, and this changes again, and this changes again, and it continues to. And it's something that I've been particularly passionate about ever since.
So, after motherhood, you decided to make sexuality your work. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I went into the world. I founded a company that was called The Tulip with my sister. And at that point, it was about pelvic health for women and looking at like these traditional models of pelvic care from around the world. And then I got connected with the founder of Foria, and we kind of really hit it off. And at that point, Foria was like a tiny little 2-person, 3-person operation here in California. And we had a couple of people in Colorado. And it just started like blooming into this beautiful dynamic where we really helped to build the brand to what it is today.
Going back to the pelvic floor, how do you feel about the kind of education and knowledge that you had before giving birth? Because I think a lot of women don't really know anything about
Yeah.
it. Is that,
Yeah.
would you say that's correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The pelvic floor, we hear about it in terms of like, do your Kegels because your pelvic floor keeps your bladder and your uterus in place. And it's so important for, preventing prolapse and preventing urinary leakage and stuff like that. But it also plays a crucial role in pleasure and being able to orgasm and experience sexual pleasure. So the fact that it's not talked about, nor are we taught how to proactively support the pelvic floor leading into pregnancy, leading into birth, and then supported postpartum. Like places like France, in their care of birthing people, they have things in place where you get pelvic floor physical therapy after you give birth, just as part of your care. And we don't have anything like that here in the United States, but it's really important. This crucial part of our understanding of our bodies, and it's unfortunate that not many people are offered the opportunity to understand that before they're looking at really concerning issues because something has changed.
Yeah, I've had a few friends who've gone through really extreme prolapse, and that's really
Mm-hmm.
scary. I think there are different
Mm-hmm.
levels in the UK. I'm not sure if it's the same
Yeah, there's different
universally.
levels. There's different levels, yeah.
Uh,
So there's different kinds. There's bladder prolapse, there's uterine prolapse, there's rectal prolapse. They can all, it's anything, any organ that's falling into the vaginal canal. And so there can be a number of different ways you're prolapsing and yeah, levels of intensity.
wow, it sounds so painful. And I heard a statistic that I don't know how many, the percentage of vaginal birth actually go, the people who give birth vaginally, there was over 50% who will experience some form of prolapse. And I thought that was pretty
Interesting.
high. I mean, I heard that statistic once. And I think, I know I have friends in France actually, and they did the training, the pelvic floor training, but I think it was just after birth. And then it's like, oh, you're
Yeah,
okay now. But I think what would
exactly.
you say it's like important to maintain all the
Oh,
time?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the pelvic floor, it's not just like the seat of your sexuality and your sexual reproductive health, but it's also the seat of like it's the hinge of your body. Your hips are the hinge of your body. So you're constantly leaning over, squatting, picking things up. And your pelvic floor plays this crucial role in your stability. A lot of times, like in elderly people, tripping and falling and not having balance has to do with imbalance in the pelvic floor. And we don't even consider these things. So it's like a crucial part of your well-being and your ability to move and experience life freely. And there's just so many things that we do that aren't really good for the health of your pelvic floor.
Could you
You know,
explain what things that aren't good, for example?
yeah, even simple things like that we're not taught, like when you have a bowel movement, for example,
Uh-huh.
you're not supposed to push. Pushing puts downward pressure on the pelvic floor. You're
Uh-huh.
supposed to let your rectum just relax
Expand.
and
Okay.
open. And so the difference in those two things can, like, downward pressure is that thing that causes prolapse. And it's the same for, you know, um, even the Kegels that we're not taught to do them in the appropriate way and to use the breath, because there's the abdominal thoracic diaphragm that really impacts the pelvic floor. And you're supposed to only do a Kegel when your breath is fully exhaled. Otherwise, when you inhale and your lungs expand, it puts downward pressure on your abdominal organs, which puts downward pressure onto your pelvic organs. So doing a Kegel when you're actually having a lot of breath in your body is counterproductive to what they're trying to do.
So you
Another
squeeze on the out breath. Is that
You squeeze
correct?
on the out breath. Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
you breathe in, you let your belly expand. And this is another really good one, is we're taught to hold in our bellies.
Hmm.
Bad. That is not good for pelvic floor health. We actually need, like, if your belly is, extended a little bit, it makes more rooms for your organs to move around. And when you suck it in, that again is that downward pressure on the pelvic floor that makes the organs, move lower, have more pressure, have less support. And so letting your belly just be soft and
Hmm.
do what it wants to do is really, really important.
Another thing I think is, correct me if I'm wrong, another mistake would be tensing your buttocks when you're doing a
Yep.
pelvic floor. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because a lot of people, for a Kegel, they're tightening their anus, and really where you want to focus is your vaginal canal. I mean, they're all connected. It's almost like a figure eight kind of sphincter muscle structure, but definitely want to focus the Kegel on the vagina versus the rectum.
Definitely. And also the thighs as well. People like just tensing the whole area.
Yeah,
Supposed to be just like
yeah,
lift and squeeze. And then we have to think
yeah.
about breath as well.
Exactly, exactly.
Are you familiar with yoni breathing? Would that be a good thing to do?
Oh,
Is that
that's
kind of,
interesting.
because I've heard of the practice called yoni breathing, which is engaging the pelvic floor with the breath.
Hmm.
So
I think it'd be something similar to what I was saying earlier, is like on the inhale, everything's soft and open, and even like maybe like the letting the labia kind of soften and be full out. And then on the exhale, you tighten and you pull in, and you want to squeeze not just the base of the vagina, but internally all the way up through the canal. Even if you can't sense it,
mhm.
putting your mind on the musculature that you imagine to be connecting to can help connect that mind body movement, and pulling it all the way up like an elevator. And you can bring your belly button into it as well as like bring in the lower abdominal muscles. But connecting with that with your breath is essential. I mean, it's absolutely crucial.
I've never heard that before because I'm actually a sex toy reviewer, so I have 750 sex toys in my possession. Yeah, I
Wow.
have a spare room like full of them. It's 10 years
Wow.
of work. But obviously
Wow.
the same companies make pelvic floor, Kegel balls, etc. And what I've learned is my favorite method is the app controlled ones that have
Mhm.
biofeedback because
Yeah,
it's measuring the release as well as the squeeze. Because I've heard, correct me
absolutely.
if I'm wrong, that using this weighted system is really bad because it's putting you in this permanent sense of
Hmm.
tension because you're
Yep.
wearing these balls for let's say 15 minutes and you're
Yep.
standing up and all
Yep.
of your muscles are tense for that long just so they don't fall out. And that's not really
Exactly.
a good way. I mean, if you're like, I just come from the gym now, I wouldn't be squeezing my bicep for 15 minutes. It's that you have to kind of release and
Exactly.
contract. What
Yeah.
would you say
Yeah.
about that? Mm.
It's so important actually. And so I had a private practice for a long time where I was doing intravaginal pelvic work.
Mm.
And more often than not, there are places, it's not just like someone has a lax pelvic floor or a tight pelvic floor. It actually can be like areas where there's laxity in the muscles, which just means they're not activating in the way that they could be. But there's also more often than not chronic tension in the pelvic floor. And so when you have a product like that that's asking you to like hold and create more tension without the opposite action of releasing, opening, softening, pushing out even a little bit, then you're creating a cycle of chronic tension in an area that already likely is holding tension and imbalance.
So would you recommend just doing the exercises without any tools or what would you recommend?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think doing it like with the breath is really important. So like making sure at the very least you're pairing your Kegel with the breath. So like we've talked about that big inhale, everything's soft and open, and on exhale, you can squeeze and contract. But then working with someone, having, if you have any kind of concerns about the pelvic floor, if you're like, there's pain sexually or something just doesn't feel right, or you're not, you feel numb, or you just want to check it out, like we're working with someone hands-on who can say like, yeah, this muscle grouping actually is holding a lot of tension. How can I help bring this? You could do this with your own hands too, but you can feel muscle tension by like using your thumb and kind of tracking in a clockward motion around and inside the vagina.
So how many times a week should you do them for and how long for, would you say?
I mean, I think it's based person to person. A couple times a week for 15 minutes is kind of the average. You don't have to overdo it. It's not something that's like it's not that Kegels are the only thing that are going to support the pelvic floor. It's something that can support it, but also like posture and wearing
Okay.
high heels and what kind of exercise you're doing. And it's all of these other habits that we've developed in our lives, sucking in our bellies all the time. Like those are the things that also are going to really have a long-term impact. And so it's looking at it dynamically and going, what are the things that are going to support the health of this like really important structure in my body? What are the things that I'm doing that maybe I can change? And then, bringing in tools, biofeedback tools, organic kind of natural Kegels, things like that when you need it.
I did a class of hypopressives once. It was amazing. Is that a good,
Oh,
when you get this
I've never
stuck in
heard
the
of it.
stomach rain? It's this weird thing. It's kind of like pelvic floor, but really, making a concave stomach with brick. It's like
Mm.
a lot of breathing in pelvic floor. A lot of people who
Oh,
went to this class were doing it postpartum just to, it's a really incredible thing because you're working very, very deep muscles if you want to get those
yeah.
killer abs,
Oh,
It's called
interesting.
hypopressives. Yeah, that was in my gym a couple of gyms ago. It was fantastic. But I couldn't quite, you need to really work it a lot to actually get that
Yeah.
effect when you're making this concave belly. It
Yeah.
looks very weird when you see it.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
definitely. And what else would you say? Pilates as well. They say that's kind of good for pelvic floor.
Good for the pelvic floor. Can also create tension if you're doing it,
Mm.
a lot. And so again, it's just that balance between what's working for your body and supporting it and what's overdoing it and creating like too much for the body to hold.
Okay, so tell us, you just touched on before about is it Foria? How
Yeah.
do you
For, yeah.
so you're
Yeah.
the chief content officer. Could you
Mhm.
tell us more about that?
Yeah, so Foria, Foria is almost like I see Foria as my third baby, because I joined the company when we were so small, and it's been such a labor of love and collaborative effort between a lot of really incredible people to be where we were and where we are now. And we are, and I think we were actually the first company really focused on creating all natural formulas, plant-based formulas for female sexual pleasure and female sexual well-being. And it's been over the last almost decade now that we've developed these incredible lines for different intimate need sets across the lifespan. So our core line is our intimacy line. And that one is, at this point, kind of has a cult following because it's so effective and so phenomenal. We have an arousal oil. We have internal suppositories that are called the intimacy melts. We have an all natural lubricant. We have bath salts that are made with aphrodisiacs for getting in the mood. And what we've tried to do is take like the female sexual response cycle. The sexual response cycle is the same for everyone, but for some women, it can take a little longer to state change out of all of the thoughts and to get more into sensation. And so we've looked dynamically at like how arousal works in the vulva and in the vagina and for the female body, and created a line that works on activating arousal, enhancing pleasure, enhancing comfort, helping anything that's getting in the way of experiencing pleasure kind of get muted or move to the background, and to really help people connect with their libido and their desire. And it's phenomenal and so exciting to be part of a company that's that committed to these different parts that are crucial to our life and our well-being. We also have an amazing period line that's all about relief of, mild to severe period concerns. So things like PMS and cramps and all of the tension and moodiness that's associated with periods. And we're doing work in the menopause space, the mother space as well.
So what kind of products would you have for periods then? That's something I've never heard that
So we
before.
have a relief suppository, which is,
Okay.
I think one of like their most innovative, incredible products. And we've been first to market in a lot of these areas where no one was really focusing their attention. And then there's been these awesome waves of people being like, yeah, actually, that is an important thing for us to give attention to. But we created suppositories that are very, very rich in particular cannabinoids and plant compounds that absorb locally into the tissues. So you're thinking like most people who experience cramps are taking over-the-counter pain relief. They have to go through the digestive tract. They can mess with the liver. They can deteriorate the stomach lining. There's all of these like negative side effects of taking those every month. And what we did is we said, okay, the pain is starting in the uterus, the inflammation starting in the uterus, the discomfort starting in this area. Like how can we target that area and support it and create something that's all natural, has no side effects, and really will work? And so we did a lot of research on plants that are beneficial for that type of discomfort, and developed a very, very potent suppository, and it's changed a lot of people's lives.
Well, that's fascinating. As a sex toy reviewer, I also get a lot of free lubricant sent to me. And I look at the
Oh,
ingredients and I'm
sure.
like, no way. So I
Isn't it?
just, yeah, it's
It's
terrible.
crazy. Oh, yeah. We talk about this all the time because it's the reason we created our lube. Because our
Mm,
motto kind of before our lube was like, we are only going to create stuff that like no one's ever made before. And
mhm.
then we were talking to people and they were using lubes, and they're full of carcinogens. They're full of glycerins, sugars, things that throw off your pH, things that affect your vaginal microbiome, flavors, colorings. I mean, just just the worst kind of stuff. And you're putting it on a mucosal membrane, like your vulva, your inner vulva, and your vagina, they're all so absorbent. The tissue is just like sucks things straight into your bloodstream. So if you're putting chemicals there, it's basically like ingesting it into your mouth. It's going straight into your body. And yes, that was the impetus behind our lubricant. We were just like, people need options that are actually going to work and are really, really clean.
Definitely. Because I think a lot of people also use labeling, which is really confusing, saying it's natural
Yeah,
ingredients. And then the first
exactly.
thing you see is glycerin, and
Yeah.
I think that's just so bad. And I think it's really worth spending a bit more on lubricant, think considering where you're putting it. Would you
Yeah.
agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, glycerin, you're like, yo, that's all natural. Yeah, it's a sugar. And guess what
Mm.
loves sugar? Yeast and the bacteria that are opportunistic that live in your vagina. And it can totally, lead to yeast infection, bacterial vaginosis. And so it's right. It's not just like being an all natural ingredient. It's actually what's the impact and how does this work with this part of my body? And I would also say, because there's kind of this greenwashing of,
Mm.
quote unquote, all natural products where people are like,
Definitely.
this plant and this plant and this extract. And something we've been very committed to since the beginning, which still I'm surprised not a lot of people are doing, is testing your ingredients. Like we will only use organic ingredients in
Mm.
our formulas because what happens when you take a plant and you extract it into like a concentrated version of that, you are also concentrating all of the pesticides, all of the fertilizers, and all of the chemicals that is grown with. And those are going again into your body. And so it might be an all natural plant, but if it's not all natural farming methods, you're again like putting yourself in my opinion, not in a good position for the health of your body. And so we've committed always, always, always to organic ingredients whenever they're available. And we test at multiple phases during our manufacturing process. It's cool. It has a little QR code on the box and you can pull it up and you're like, oh, my lube tests free of, not just all of the terrible ingredients it could have, but also mold and pesticides and
Mm.
heavy metals. And like, how cool that we never even think about that, but they're in all of our products.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. I mean, I've been in this industry now for about 10 years as a
Yeah.
tester and reviewer, and I've had so many things sent to me, and I've only really reviewed a couple of brands in that in all of
Yeah.
all of the things I've received. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
and there's
It
just no
is.
education. Even if you go to the gynecologist, they're using the worst lubricants as well, the most commercial, like
It's
cheap
horrible.
lubricants. Yeah,
It's
there's just not enough
horrible.
education.
Yeah, there's really not.
So is this brand based on CBD, or is it that they're just plants in general? A lot of the
Well, we originally were a CBD company. Actually, we were originally a THC company.
Oh wow.
And what has developed over time is like um, that was the first plant that inspired us and obviously had clear action on the body.
Hmm.
And what's happened since 2014 is like we've just fallen in love with plants from all around the world that have a lot of cultural significance and have been used for long, long, long periods of time in particular ways. And so we're looking at these cultural and anecdotal evidence across hundreds, if not thousands of years of usage of these plants and going like, yeah, this is going to be a really potent plant to put in our formulas. So, like kava, cacao is another one we use a lot. And so we do have hemp in there and we have a lot of other multi-botanical formulas as well.
So you mentioned earlier different stages of life and sexuality. I'm very curious about menopause and sexuality. I don't think there's enough
Yeah,
information about that, especially
yeah,
approaching it from a natural perspective. Do you have
yeah.
any tips on that?
So many thoughts on this. Yeah, so I'll tell you a funny story. Like 5 years ago, we were working with our PR company and we were like, we have to talk about menopause. Like, this is so important. We're looking at these statistics that are staggering. It's like upwards of like 50 to 60% of perimenopause and menopausal women experience a decrease in their libido and their sex drive. And upwards of like, I think 50 to 60% start experiencing painful sex because of the changes that their tissues are going through during the change in the estrogen production. And then like 30% are experiencing a change in their vaginal lubrication. And no one was talking about it, like no one. And we built this whole campaign out and we sent it out to a bunch of publications and no one would pick it up because no one wanted to talk about menopause. And it's funny because like we were on such the front of the wave that there wasn't a wave yet. And I don't know if this has reached where you are yet in Europe, but um, we're seeing a big wave of people talking about menopause now, and it's very exciting because not only is this time of life being decoupled from that kind of tropey, like menopause is like older women and, a non-sexual part of the life, and you kind of like become desexualized because of age. The narrative now is really changing, and it's very exciting to be a part of that conversation. And I think that the main thing that we're focusing on is that menopause, if you look at not recent history, but kind of you looking at commonalities in different cultures around the world over, thousands of years, and how this part of the life was revered as actually a time of not just like wisdom, but someone who's like to be so respected and so looked up to and so adored and so taken care of, and just like the absolute opposite of what ageism has done with this part of life, particularly for women, because it doesn't happen with men. It does not. It happens with women. And so it's really, I think, the most important part of menopause is like taking back that narrative around it being a highly sensual, erotic, freeing part of life, where you know your body better than you ever have. And sure, it might be going through changes, but there's tools to support that. And your emotional intelligence, your erotic intelligence, the connection you have with your body, all of that is going to support you in having probably the best sex of your life. And so that's what we want to be talking about. It's not the like, oh, menopause, you're going to enter menopause and it's going to be so sad and your body is going to change. It's like, actually, let's give you the tools so you can really celebrate how amazing, how desirable, how magnificent, and just fucking awesome it can be with its challenges, like not washing over them, but honoring the challenges and honoring, the excellence that comes with this time of life.
So we need to know what these tools are.
Yeah. Well, for us, it's like a lot of it is an intimacy line that we have. It's like the intimacy melts, the awaken arousal oil, the sex oil. That combo is like, that's vaginal hydration. That's deep, deep, deep comfort. That's support with the arousal and the access to orgasm, and it's support with the libido. And so we get phenomenal feedback from
You get
women
support
going,
with libido. That sounds interesting.
yeah. So, and this is interesting, right? Because I don't know how much you know about responsive desire versus spontaneous desire.
I can. Well, maybe you would like to explain it, because maybe our
Yeah,
listeners don't.
I'll explain it. Yeah. So there's these two kind of like modes of understanding how desire arises in the body. And the one we're most familiar with as sex drive desire is spontaneous desire. And it's desire that arises in the mind and then starts to turn the body on. So it's like, it's what we see in movies where suddenly someone's like hot and heavy and they're kissing and they're turned on, and it's like passion. And it's that out of nowhere kind of desire that most people associate with their sex drive. In actuality, a lot of people who are women and who identify as women actually experience responsive desire more often. And responsive desire is desire that's stirred and woken up through the body, and then the mind catches up. And so it's something that's coming through your senses, a touch, a kiss, a scent, a sound, watching something. And the way that awaken in particular is working for libido is it's stirring your sexual response so that all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm turned on, like I'm getting aroused. And it stirs your desire to this part where you're feeling pleasure in your body and you're feeling connected to your desire in a way that's activating the rest of your, the brain and the rest of your sexual response.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. It's cool. We just did a clinical study and on 3 of our products in our intimacy line. And I think it was something insane. And the company we worked with was actually like, we've never seen statistics like this before, but don't quote me on this, but I believe it was 100% of participants answered that Awaken helps them feel more connected to their libido and their sex drive. like 100%, not 99.9%, 100% of
What does,
people
sorry?
awaken the arousal oil that I was talking
Oh,
about.
amazing. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Another thing,
Yeah.
I
It's
actually
exciting.
did an article recently about lubricants for menopause. And as I was researching, I found a company that was making these pessaries
Hmm.
for that. Then it was because I learned, because I think there's not enough education about this, that the lubrication or lubricant is not just for when you want to have sex, it's just for
Hmm.
day-to-day maintenance, because
Yeah,
it feels very
exactly.
uncomfortable and
Yeah,
maybe a bit dry and a bit itchy.
exactly.
And I just thought, whoa, why don't we know this? There's just not
Why
enough.
don't we know this?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the story of our company. It's like we keep asking ourselves, like, how is no one talking about this? Why don't we know this? Same
Mm,
happens postpartum.
mm,
Postpartum, you get a similar decline in estrogen, especially if you're breastfeeding. And you go
mm,
through a similar thing where you're like very tender vaginal tissues. It might be slightly drier. Menopause, it's a much more noticeable change. But
mm,
it's like, how do we not, if half the world's population is experiencing these things regularly, like menstruation, regularly, like, pregnancy and postpartum in particular, like perimenopause and menopause, and we just have not done any kind of job to educate and prepare people for these transitions in their lives, it's it's astonishing the lack of information that we're given about it. And it actually, to me, it reveals this much deeper, um, it's a much deeper loss we've had in connection with our cultures and our lineages and practices that bring women into different phases of their lives in a way that's like intact, that your grandma is like, hey, your body's going to be going through this. This is what my body's done. Here's the herbs I've used. Here's the practices, or for, places, a good example of this, I think it's in Taiwan, for postpartum, they have programs in place. It might not be Taiwan, by the way, but it's a dear friend of mine that I studied with, was speaking about these places where you go after you have a baby, and the government hires the grandmas who are no longer working to
mm,
come and take care of the mothers so that they can recover. They get a massage every day. They get cooked. Their bellies are massaged. Their organs are massaged. They have the right kind of like, belly binding happening, so it's not causing like, the fact that we don't have intact practices like this is actually, that's what all of this points to, is like the rupture in our societies for taking care of the most vital and important part of our lives, and the lack of prioritizing women's health in general. So yeah.
People just want to assume they just get back to normal and spring back and not really share these things, I think. 'Cause I think I saw another statistic about prolapse, that it took on average maybe 5 years for a woman to tell a medical professional that there was an issue. They just kind
Yeah.
of suffer in silence.
Yeah.
That's
I
very
mean, very similar statistics with endometriosis. It takes like
mm,
many years for most people with endometriosis to get diagnosed. And it's so
mm.
common. It's like 1 in 10 people have endometriosis here in the United States.
Wow. And there's also another there's a program in the UK that's similar to The View, but less glamorous. And there's one woman on it, and she's had about 5 kids or something. And she talked about the first bowel movement after giving birth and how traumatic it was. I thought, wow, it makes sense, because if
Terrifying.
you push something out of your vagina that you're using kind of similar muscles,
Yeah.
it must be hell.
It's so scary. It's
Yeah.
scary, especially if you have stitches or your
Oh yeah.
organs still feel like they're finding their place. And just these things that our body does that we don't talk about because it's not, I think people see it as, being something to be ashamed of, but
Hmm.
actually it's something that everyone else is experiencing. Like an anal fissure or an anal tear
Yeah.
is it's very likely to happen during birth. And if it doesn't, it can happen due to dehydration from breastfeeding. And you've done all of this pushing, and it can be excruciating, and they can last for years.
Oh
And
my
so you might not just be like the first bowel movement, you can be like the first 200 bowel movements.
God.
And yeah, I had a friend call me crying in pain 3 months after birth. And she was just like, I can't poop anymore. Like,
Oh.
I'm terrified every time. And like you have to troubleshoot and there's all sorts of things you can do. But just like the common body knowledge that we're lacking, severely lacking.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's going back to all the different things that you do in your life, and a couple of lifestyle questions for you. How do you
Right.
manage your time after doing so many things? Do you have
It's
any
a
tips?
great question. I think my best tip for managing your time, which is not really a tip for managing your time, but it's more about finding the energy to do the things you love,
Hmm.
is to make sure you're focusing your energy towards the things that you love, because you really will find and know how to create time when you're passionate about your work. I'm sure you can relate to that.
Absolutely,
When
yeah.
you're like, oh, you follow the thing that you love and you will make it happen. And it might feel very full and busy. You might have to let things go, but um, and then saying yes to what makes sense. Really checking in, like um, not saying yes just to every opportunity that comes your way, but to really like, this is important to me. This I'm just gonna have to let go of. But it's a
Definitely.
constant balance. I have two young kids, work
Oh,
full time,
wow.
do all
Speaking
sorts of
of
things.
energy and balance with two small
Yeah.
kids, a quick question for you. So what advice would you give to a busy couple with children, and how could they prioritize pleasure when
Hmm.
time and energy are an issue?
Yeah, I love that question. Um, it really depends on the phase of life the children are in. And I was reading a statistic the other day that uh, pre-K, like ages like 4 and 5, preschool age, maybe even 3 and 4, women report the least and lowest amount of sexual satisfaction at that age range in their lives. And it's because there's such a demand on energy and constant attention when kids are really little. So I think for a couple who's going through the very early years of parenthood, it's just like part of it is bracing yourself. Honestly, part of it is going like, we know that our availability for each other is going to change. So how do we build in the structure for connection? You absolutely hire a babysitter once a week.
Hmm.
You absolutely create time to connect, because your romantic and sexual tethers to each other is what's going to give you the energy to continue doing all the hard stuff together. It's what resources you. And a lot of the times we will experience um, the idea of sex or connecting sexually as something that's like, oh, I have to do that, or that's like extra, or it seems like more work. But actually, it's not. Like when you're in the moment, it recharges you, it recharges your nervous system, it helps with your stress levels. It's the anticipation of, the time it's going to take, and the just the conflict between carving out that time and all of the other things that need attention. So my number one suggestion is like, don't let your intimate, sexual, romantic life be put on the back burner. Like proactively carve out time for it. And by carving out time for it doesn't mean you have to have sex, especially the like, heteronormative narrative of sex, which is like P and V, penis and vagina penetration, one done, like good. Like that's not going to really help anyone feel connected. I mean, carve out time for engaging each other's erotic energies through massage, through intimate touch, through kissing, through taking baths together, through breathing together and looking in each other's eyes, and then seeing what comes naturally. Maybe the moment leads into incredible lovemaking. Maybe you fall asleep holding each other. But like, if you let it be beautiful and let it be what the moment calls for, and be open to that instead of resisting because you're kind of like afraid about how long it's going to take or what you're going to have to do, it'll continue to be a fountain of nourishment in your life that is so profoundly important.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that there shouldn't be so much emphasis on penetration, because I think that's the number. If I'd gone through all of that birth stuff, the
Yeah.
last thing I'll be thinking about would be doggy style sex, for
Oh,
example,
yeah.
but no way.
Exactly. You'd be like, no. Yeah. Well, and a lot of people, there's a kind of like sub narrative that's like, oh, is my husband getting his needs met, or I want to meet his needs? And
Mhm.
um, especially those first 2 years can be challenging on couples. And it's less like, I'm going to speak for men here, I hope I'm getting it right, but it's not that he needs sex. It's that he needs you.
Oh,
He
wow,
needs
that's
to,
beautiful.
he needs to like feel your heart and your body and your love for him and your desire for him. And so, like, yes, getting off can be a part of that, but he can do that on his own also. It's actually that he wants to feel like your love and your desire for him flowing through you. And if he doesn't feel that, it's like any amount of getting each other off is not going to nourish that deep inner part of what either of you desire. And so I think if you lead with that, that is like such a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's not the getting off, it's the connection you're both seeking.
That's really beautiful. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So a couple of quick questions. What was the book that changed your life?
Ooh, so many good ones. You know what book I just go back to again and again is The Women Who Run with Wolves by
Oh,
Clarissa
the second guess who said
Shields.
that. I need to read it.
It's the best. It's the best book. And it just gives so much context to the many, many, many versions of ourselves that live inside us that we don't always give ourselves permission to be. And it's stunningly beautiful and poetic. And yeah, that's my love.
Amazing. I want to check that out because that's more than one person's told me now. And what phrase, affirmation, or quote do you live by?
That's a good one too. So I was thinking about this, and the one that has come to mind for me again and again and again, and we talked about it a little bit. It's a Rumi quote, and it goes something like, "Let the beauty of what you love be what you do." And it's this idea that like the whole world is made of beauty, and it's actually aching for us to create more beauty in our own lives. And so if we follow like what we're drawn to, if we follow the beauty of like what brings us more alive, we naturally contribute more beauty to the world. But we also will naturally have more energy, and we'll feel more recharged by the demands the demands of just being alive. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
So how can people find you?
Two ways if you want to find me, myself, and I. Instagram's probably a good place. It's Kiana, Kiana .Reeves, Reeves. And then if you want to find Foria is an amazing company that I've been with forever. Foria wellness.com. So Foria wellness.com. And then our Instagram is at Foria Wellness.
Amazing. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. It's been very insightful speaking to you.
Yeah.
And I love
Absolutely
what you're doing.
delightful.
Thank you so much.